Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to LittleAfrica BronxNews' Meet the Candidate interview series. My name is Mona Davids. I am the founder and the publisher of LittleAfrica BronxNews. As many of you know, as part of our civic engagement and our political engagement initiatives, we began hosting Meet the Candidate interviews last year, where we are interviewing candidates in local races for city council here in the Bronx, as well as citywide races for mayor, comptroller, and public advocate. I'm pleased and honored to have today Miss Elisa Crespo, who is a candidate for City Council in District 15, here with us today to talk about her candidacy. And for our viewers, especially those who live in City Council District 15, please be advised that you do have a special election on March 23rd. The reason for this special election is to fill the vacancy left by former City Councilman Richie Torres, now Congressman Richie Torres, and that's why there is a special election on March 23rd. And prior to that, the week before, is early voting. You can also call in or email or go online to request an absentee ballot as well. But please know that March 23rd is election day for the special election for District 15. So mark your calendars. So coming back to our guest today, Miss Elisa Crespo, welcome. Thank you so very much for joining us here at LittleAfrica BronxNews. Please introduce yourself to our viewers.
Thank you, Mona, so much for having me. Good afternoon. My name is Elisa Crespo. And as Mona said, I'm running for City Council in the heart of the Bronx in District 15. And, you know, I'm born and raised in New York City. This is my home. This is the only place I've ever lived. I have lived all over the city, with the exception of Staten Island. I was born in Brooklyn in a public hospital, and I raised by a working class family. My mom raised us mostly by herself on her own. We are products of the very same public institutions that I think we need to revitalize. So we're talking about public housing, public transportation, public schools. And I started organizing as an elected student leader at CUNY. And it was there where I really learned the power of organizing and the collective, what a collective united group can do. And so that put me into close proximity with legislators in Albany, showed me the inner workings of government. And shortly after graduating with my political science degree, I then started working for elected officials of different levels of government, both in the Bronx and elsewhere, other parts of the city, and then began working for the Bronx Borough President's Office as an education liaison. And a year ago, I decided to run for the New York City Council here in the Bronx, because I understand that public service is powerful and it has the opportunity to transform people's lives for the better. And I also really think it will take a new generation of bold leaders to bring real change to our city. So that's who I am. I'm a born, bred New Yorker, someone who understands firsthand the inequities of this city. And I'm really excited and honored to be running to represent the hardworking mothers and essential workers of the Bronx.
Well, thank you, Ms. Crespo, for that introduction. And, you know, just speaking about your background, and you mentioned you worked as an educational liaison for the Bronx Borough President's Office. So I'm just going to jump into education. We're just going to get started. Let's just get started with that right away. So this is my question to you. The New York City Department of Education has a budget of over $30 billion. And I always follow that with a B.
You have to.
Dollars. Okay. And here in the Bronx, we have a saying, not 62, not 62, not 62. But every single year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, um, the Bronx is always number 62 when it comes to the proficiency rates of students compared to the rest of New York State. We're always, we always have the lowest proficiency rates when it comes to our state exams. And this is not new. And granted, I grew up in Brooklyn, I grew up in Bed-Stuy, but even when I was growing up, this was the case when it came to the Bronx. So my question to you is, as city councilwoman, and as someone who knows the ins and the outs of the Department of Education, working as an education liaison, how do you plan on holding the Department of Education accountable for the educational outcomes of students, not just in District 15, not just throughout the Bronx, but throughout New York City?
Great question, Mona. As you started the question, you said that the Department of Education has a $30 billion budget. It is the largest percentage of our city budget goes towards education, as it should.
Mhm.
But with that $30 billion, you would expect better results from the proficiency levels in English and math from our students. Part of the problem is the money is not being distributed in an equitable manner. So the money isn't being focused on the schools, the most neediest schools in the poorest neighborhoods with the lowest grades.
Mhm.
And so we have to start there. The schools that have the lowest proficiency rates deserve the most investment, and we need to pay laser focused attention on those schools and what we can do to improve that. Um, the DOE is a monster of a bureaucracy, and there's really no accountability there. And I also think that this plays into mayoral control. Right now, the mayor of the city of New York is the one that has unilateral control over the schools. There was a time where it was not like that, where you had elected school boards and parents and educators and stakeholders had more of a say in education policy. Granted, there were lots of problems with that. And that is why Mayor Bloomberg pushed for full mayoral control. Now, I think that we need to reform that. I think that city council members and perhaps the public advocate and perhaps the CEC presidents, the Community Education Council presidents, which are the former school boards, should be allowed to appoint more members to the CEC. And I think that would create more accountability and transparency in how education policy is made in this city. There are so many things that we can do with our public school system to make it better for Black and Brown students in low-income communities. I think a lot of it also has to do with programming. There aren't enough arts programs, music programs. And studies show that when you have those types of programs, it makes for better outcomes. I think that when it comes to, first of all, we should have, there's no reason why the schools in the Bronx should not have the same amounts of programs and resources as schools in Manhattan. We should have more STEMs and robotics programs. We should have more work-based learning and vocational training for young people to be ready for the 21st century job market right out of high school. We know that everyone in the Bronx, particularly in this district, doesn't always make it to college, but it doesn't mean that they have to work low-wage jobs for the rest of their lives. And I think that we need to move away from the zero tolerance policy, from the punitive disciplinary actions or measures which are disproportionately used against Black and Brown students. I think we need to invest in our schools. They need to be fully funded. We need to fight for the foundational aid that we're owed by the state. We need to fight for more guidance counselors and social workers in our schools. Universal after-school programming will work wonders for mothers who are working and have trouble accessing childcare. So there's a lot that we can do. Building more community schools that have on-site wraparound services, on-site clinics in schools. That's where we need to put our focus. And I believe that we can get there with a chair of an education committee in the council that can be bullish enough to fight for those things. But again, the education system here doesn't, parents don't really have much of a say. Educators don't have much of a say. Students don't have much of a say in what goes on in education policy. And I think it needs to be more democratized and localized if we're going to want to see better results. We also have to make sure that we're doing enough outreach and education, that parents understand what resources are available to them, right? PTAs need help with learning how to fundraise. We need to subsidize that, right? PTAs in the Bronx, in low-income communities of color, are not going to be able to raise as much money as PTAs on the Upper East Side or Lower Manhattan. And that's part of the problem as well. So we need to look at this from in a lens of equity, and we absolutely need to start by funding the schools, the most neediest of schools in the most impoverished neighborhoods.
No, as a parent, I agree with you on many of the points you made, in particular, especially when it comes to the PTAs, because I've been on both of my children's parent associations. I've been a president, I've been a Title I chair, I've been an SLT member. I've done it all. And they attended Bronx schools. So I 100% agree with you on that. And just as a parent and as an active education advocate, there is a great disparity when it comes to parent associations or PTAs, because we have parent associations who are 501c3s, who raise millions of dollars, who then fund, extracurricular programs, even pay for teaching assistants at their schools. And these are schools in affluent, very, very affluent neighborhoods, while PTAs here in the Bronx can barely raise a few $100s. We make our money off of photo day. That's how we make our money. That's where the money comes in, is doing the class photos, the kids, the school photos. That's where most PTAs raise their money. So there is a great, it's quite an inequitable system, and it's an injustice. And the Department of Education, in my point of view, as a parent and someone that's served on these parent bodies, that they should find a way to make it equitable amongst all schools, so that all children can have those extracurricular programs, robotics, STEM, whatever it is that you'll find in schools on the Upper East Side, Upper West Side, in Park Slope, and other affluent, Soho, West Village, other affluent areas. So I appreciate that, because you're the first candidate and the only candidate in all the interviews that I've conducted that brought up that point. And that is a problem.
It's a big problem, and there's no reason why the city council can't provide that training and help subsidize that fundraising for the schools that need it the most.
Yes, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So, continuing on with the Department of Education, in the middle of March, Mayor de Blasio and Chancellor Richard Carranza shut down the schools, and all the children went on to remote learning. But as you're fully aware, the problem with remote learning is that not all children had access to a Chromebook or to a laptop, or their parents had an extra laptop or desktop that they could use. But also, in addition to that, many students, especially our students who are in shelters, in homeless shelters, didn't have access to broadband. And that there also contributed to uh, an even larger problem. And my question to you is, as city council member, what will you do, or what will you advocate for, to give all students digital access, Chromebook, Wi-Fi? What steps would you take, and what actions would you do to ensure that all children have this type of access now in 2021, in 2022? Because what has happened is a disgrace.
It is. It's an embarrassment, and it didn't have to be that way. I think that we didn't prepare. The DOE really ignored for years what the future of public education looks like with respect to funding for technology,
Mhm.
and we saw that play out. There lacked a real sense of urgency when it came to making sure students could engage in remote learning. And while the DOE did, you know, provide laptops and iPads to students, they just weren't prepared to do it at the scale that they needed to be prepared to do it
Yes.
for. And this was definitely something that we worked on in the borough president's office, because months into remote learning, there were still hundreds and hundreds of students in the Bronx who had not received their device. And it became such a problem that there were uh, parents being contacted by ACS because their children were not logging into class,
Yes.
and that was seen as a form of neglect. But really, what it was that these people didn't have devices, or they had devices that were faulty, or they didn't have access to high speed reliable broadband.
Mhm.
And so even though it was against the DOE policy, we still saw that happening. And that was just really terrible that that was happening. And so, I think that we, number one, we have to pass legislation in the council that makes sure that every student has access to a device that is connected to Wi-Fi, period. And there is legislation, I think, in committee that would achieve that goal. Um, but we also have to hold internet service providers accountable. And what that means is that not everyone can afford a 40, 50, $60 monthly internet service plan.
Yes.
There needs to be a low cost plan for low income New Yorkers, but that still provides them with quality high speed broadband. And we have these companies that are multinational, billion-dollar corporations that I think really haven't stepped up to the plate in the way that they should. Some of them have, some of them have not. But the digital divide, nowhere is it more prevalent than in the Bronx. And I think that the first place that the city needs to focus on is in public housing and in the shelter system. There needs to be free Wi-Fi there, not subsidized, but it needs to be free.
Yeah.
Um, and we have an internet master plan that was put forward by the mayor a couple of years ago that just has been on pause. And that needs to be accelerated. We have to connect the entire city to fiber optic cables so that we can, so that folks can have high speed, reliable internet. But it was if the DOE is going to close schools and transition students to remote learning, then we have a legal and moral obligation to ensure that students have access to devices to be able to sign on to class. I can tell you though that remote learning is really, really hurting our students. And it's such a difficult topic because you want to make sure that you are doing what is best for the safety of our families and our children. But at the same time, you know, the students that are hurting the most are the special education students, the students with IEPs, the District 75 students, the
Yeah.
English language learners. Um, they're suffering from tremendous amounts of learning loss because nothing will make up for sitting in the classroom and having live instruction from a teacher. And we have to do everything that we can to make sure that we can get back to that point. And I know that we're slowly transitioning to that, starting with our youngest students.
Yes.
But the remote learning really was a failure of our Department of Education, of our chancellor, of our mayor, for not adequately preparing for something like this to happen in advance.
No, I mean, it's you're I agree with you, and it's very difficult right now for many parents to juggle remote learning, those parents who are working from home. And then I don't even want to think about our essential workers who have to go to work and, their children are home, or they have to do remote learning, or they're at the learning centers, and there's no one to really stay on top of their schoolwork. And yeah, they absolutely, many children are falling behind. um, and my biggest concern is for our families who are in shelters, and there are just so many families with school age children who are in the shelter system.
And
And
District 15, by the way, ranks number 2 of all the districts in the Bronx, of all the council districts in the Bronx, for the most students in temporary housing. So this is a very important issue for this district.
oh wow, I did not know that. Yeah, no, then it absolutely, it definitely is. I want to touch on, because I can kind of see you being on the education committee. So I that's why I'm peppering you with these education related questions. Um, as you know, there's a lot of controversy over the specialized high school exams.
Yeah.
You have parents on both sides. Some parents are against specialized high school exams because of the low number of Black and Brown students who get into the specialized high schools. And then on the other hand, you have parents who say, well, that it's less than 10% of New York City high schools, but some students, yes, some students have an apt for math and science, and um, some students just are naturally smarter, and if these schools give them the challenge that they need, okay, great. But it's still less than 10%, where we have a whole bunch of high schools that are failing to properly educate the children. Let's focus on the 90%. My question to you is, um, do you have a position on the specialized high schools? And also, just another question. You mentioned, Mayor Bloomberg, how he was the one that brought in mayoral control. Under Mayor Bloomberg, he did create additional specialized high schools, because there are only 4 specialized high schools under the Hecht-Kalendra Act, which is the act that established for our viewers, the act that established specialized high schools back in the early 70s. And those 4 schools are LaGuardia High School, Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, and Brooklyn Tech. The other specialized high schools, like the one at Lehman College, York College, the one in Staten Island, and the other one in Brooklyn, Brooklyn Latin, were created by Mayor Bloomberg. So we can create additional specialized high schools. So my question to you is, as city council member, how would you, how would you navigate this contentious issue, and what do you see as the middle ground when it comes to this, when it comes to addressing this issue?
So look, I'm not a big fan of the SHIZAT, the Specialized High School Exam. I don't think that we do a good enough job at providing resources to families in low-income communities of color. There are resources out there for parents who want to engage their students in them, to prepare their students for the exam in advance. But parents tend to not even know that those exist. And if you go to other more affluent neighborhoods, there's a real push to use those resources, right? Everyone knows that they exist. But why is it that in our communities, we don't know that there are free resources out there to help young people prepare for the specialized high school exam? I will say that I think that it is wrong to make that sole exam the one thing that these high schools look at in determining admissions in these specialized high schools. There are plenty of students who are not good test takers, but who are brilliant and who are smart and well-rounded. And we should look at this from a more holistic approach. We should examine many other factors, perhaps, auditions. We should look at their, attendance. We should look at other projects that they've done. We should consider speaking with teachers. We should consider speaking with parents, having interviews, doing different types of there should be other admission criteria other than solely the score you get on the SHIZAT exam. And I think because it is the way that it is, that's why you see a specialized high school like Bronx Science, where the overwhelming majority of students there are not from the Bronx. And I don't think that's fair to Bronxites. I think we have to, again, we have to look at this from a viewpoint of equity, and we have to make sure that students that could very well succeed in a high school like Bronx Science are really given a fighting chance at getting into these schools. And I think that just by looking at one exam is not enough. There's so many other elements and factors that you can look at to determine whether or not someone is ready and prepared to be admitted to a specialized high school. So I think that's the middle ground, expanding the criteria, expanding how we determine what is qualified to be admitted to these schools.
Okay. And coming back to just the panel for educational policy, as a parent advocate, I've always called them the puppets for educational policy, because they always vote, follow the direction of the mayor on the votes. But, in a rare instance, recently, they surprised everyone and they voted down the gifted and talented exam.
By one vote.
By one vote, and that was the Staten Island representative, who was removed promptly the next day. Which comes back to why you saying, what you said earlier, there needs to be checks and balances, and it needs to be democratized, really. I agree with you on that. But I'd like to also hear your thoughts on the gifted and talented exam that was voted down, and just this exam that is given to 4-year-olds, and based on how they do in that exam. For our viewers who are unfamiliar with GNT, as they call it, based on that exam, it's decided whether a child is gifted and talented. And then they have access to some really excellent programs. Some are local in their district, and others are citywide programs. But also when it comes to the Bronx, we don't have many GNT programs here. And that's been another fight that I've watched over the last 10, 12 years. But I'd like to get your opinion on GNT and this, this whole, this entire matter that has
Yeah,
everyone up in arms.
I think that that the PEP made the right decision for this year, right? There's no way that students and families can prepare for a GNT exam in the middle of a pandemic, right? With so much going on. So I think they were right in their decision not to move forward with the contract for this year. I think GNT needs to be expanded to a lot more schools in the Bronx. I mean, every student is gifted and talented in their own way, and we should be expanding it, and we should be making it more accessible to young people, to young students in the Bronx. So in it, that's my view on gifted and talented. It needs to be expanded.
Okay. So that concludes our education, our education topic. But speaking about education and the issues that families have to deal with, it brings me now to our next topic, which is housing. And we were talking about homeless families. So the Bronx, I call the Bronx ground zero. Like, we have essential workers throughout the city, but the home seems to be the ground zero, or where the majority of essential workers live. It's here in the Bronx. And it's also the place where they were hit the most. But it's not just essential workers, but the Bronx is the county that was also impacted the most by COVID-19, by the shutdown of the economy. And we have many Bronx families who are facing eviction, many Bronx families who are struggling. And with the eviction moratorium that Governor Cuomo's recently signed, extending it to May, um, we're just kicking the can down the road because the arrears are still adding up. And many of our Bronx families still, the parents still are not working. So when the moratorium ends,
Disaster.
it's going to, yeah, it's like we're just all walking towards this cliff. So my question to you, um, as an advocate, as a community leader now, and as a candidate, you know, how do you propose the city, the mayor, or the governor? What would be your advice on helping families deal with what's coming once this eviction moratorium ends? What would you propose to help these families um, pay their arrears? And also, not to forget them, but the small property landlords, because many Bronxites have 2-family or 3-family homes. They live on one floor, they
Mhm.
rent another floor. They are also impacted. So
Right.
what would you push for to help renters as well as small property owners?
So I think that this is an issue that the state has to take on, meaning Albany. There's legislation in committee that would essentially cancel rent. And what that means is that payments would be made on behalf of tenants who are found who cannot make payments because of instances related to COVID-19. And it also provides payments for property tax payments for small landlords who, of course, are impacted by this as well, to no fault of their own. If your tenant can't pay rent, you don't have money to pay the mortgage or property tax. So we can't just help the tenants without helping the small landlords. We have to provide relief for everyone. And we can't wait for a bailout package from the federal government because Washington politics is just, we don't have the luxury of waiting for that. So I think what we need is our state Senate and Assembly to build the political courage to raise revenues, pass legislation that creates revenues, and there are multiple bills in Albany that would do that. Taxing Wall Street, stock transfer tax, taxing billionaires, taxing second homes, pied-à-terre taxes. There's so much we can do to invest in our New York. And with that revenue that we would gain, we need to use it to pay back these arrears for these tenants and to help the small landlords be able to pay off the payments that they've missed out on. So this is absolutely something that only Albany can cure. And as a councilwoman, I will definitely be pushing the Bronx delegation to sign on to co-sponsor that legislation that sits in committee in Albany, because as you pointed, we're leading to a disaster. The Bronx is already number one in evictions. It is number one in many, many things that it should not be number one in. And prior to COVID-19, we were already the borough that had the most evictions. And this is only going to exacerbate that. And so we absolutely have to provide rent relief, true and real rent relief for tenants and for small landlords.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. It's I'm gonna look up and see what's happening with that in committee, but it's just, it's a train crash that we see about to happen in so many Bronxites, so many families throughout New York City may end up homeless. And
Yeah, and it's like, it's one thing to pause evictions, right? Or place a moratorium on evictions, which, thank you, we're grateful for that. But how does that solve the real problem at hand, which is that mortgages have to be paid if we don't want homes to be foreclosed? And how do we do that? Property tax, the state and the city can forego property tax, right? That will hurt us, but the banks want their money. The banks are not going to forgive that. So, it's up to us to figure that out.
yes, it is. And I really hope they do figure it out soon. Um, so continuing speaking about housing, I want to talk about NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority. Um, every every year, every winter, you've seen the articles lately in the newspapers and on TV: no heat, no hot water, dilapidated apartments, mold, mildew, broken elevators. Like, it just continues on and on and on. And it's literally costing people their lives. Okay, we've had, a senior citizen die because of that as well. There's an article not too long ago about a housing complex, also in the Bronx, senior housing, that the senior citizens have no heat, no hot water, with the lead paint debacle. Like, we have young children whose lives are forever being changed because they live in these apartments, in NYCHA apartments with lead. Um, so it's a problem. But this is something that every year we talk about, every winter we talk about, nothing changes. And, many elected officials, including many candidates, when asked about it, they always say, oh, well, there's nothing we can do. The federal government needs to fund NYCHA, blah, 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 blah. That's what I hear. That's what I hear in my head.
Yes, I mean,
It's we all know, yes, the federal government has underfunded NYCHA, but the fact of the matter is, the senior citizen who died a few weeks ago lived in the New York City Housing Authority. The children who are poisoned with lead live in the New York City Housing Authority. Those seniors with no heat and hot water in the Bronx live in the New York City Housing Authority.
yep.
So my question to you is, what, as a city councilwoman, what is your strategy to deal with NYCHA, to deal with advocating for the families in your district who live in NYCHA?
NYCHA is a moral and political stain on our city and our state. And I think that I will say this. I agree that the federal government does need to step up. You know, these programs were started um, with the understanding that there would be a partnership with the federal government.
Mhm.
Um, and each level of government over the decades has just thrown their hands up in the air and has kicked it to the next level of government down and said, sorry, there's nothing we can do. And so the state can take this on, right? The state of New York has the power. One of the things that's a little bit frustrating about the city council is that we don't really have any power to pass revenue generating legislation other than our local property tax, which nobody wants to touch. Other than that, the real entity that has the power to create more revenue is Albany. And so I would put the blame directly on Albany, not the federal government, because as you pointed to, these are the New York City Housing Authority. This is public housing here. And so again, all roads lead to creating legislation that creates more revenue to fund public housing. NYCHA has the ability to be aspirational housing as it once was. The folks who live in NYCHA, the tenants, have the ability to work on the next level of green infrastructure, and by getting jobs provided to them to retrofit NYCHA, to make NYCHA with green roofs and solar panels, to make sure that NYCHA buildings meet code. Um, so there's a lot that we can do on the state level. On a city level, I think what we've been doing on a city and state level is we've been sort of moving towards the privatization of NYCHA. Because for us, we say, oh, well, there's no other way to gain money. NYCHA's $40 billion in the hole. How are we going to raise that much money to make the repairs that are necessary to fix the leaks and the lead and the mold and the mildew and the elevators that are not working? And so what we've done is we have infill projects. We have sold off land owned by NYCHA, parking lots and playgrounds, to create affordable housing that is leased by private management companies and private developers, and use that revenue as a means to upgrade NYCHA. We've sold uh, air rights, and then we have done the NYCHA 2.0 or PACT, which is basically New York City's version of RAD, which is again transferring over the management to private companies, right? And having them collect the rent revenue and reinvest it back into NYCHA. There are some of those things that I agree with and some I don't agree with. I'm not a fan of RAD. Um, I do think infill is a pragmatic middle road where we can, first of all, I don't think our city should be catering to the car culture anyway. And so I think that if we're losing some parking spaces in exchange for affordable housing, and the funding is going to be used to fund NYCHA, then I can support that. I
Yeah.
would rather that we fully fund NYCHA completely. And when you hear folks say that only the federal government can do that, to some degree, they're right. Only the state can and the federal government can do that. Only Albany can pass legislation that creates revenue. And only the federal government can literally print money. So there are bills in Congress. Nydia Velasquez, the Moving Forward Act, has put a bill in committee that would create $1.5 trillion of federal funding to fully invest in NYCHA. Um, we will Congress have the political courage and will to pass that bill? I don't think so. And so what's happening is, in the meantime, we're so busy waiting on federal relief, and it never comes, and the buildings just continue to be dilapidated, and people still continue to have, crazy asthma rates, and the senior you pointed to unfortunately has lost their life because we are just kicking the can down the road. And so this is something that these things will never go away unless and until NYCHA tenants unite. There are more NYCHA tenants collectively. They would make up more folks than in the city of Atlanta.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if they unite in a way that policymakers and legislators cannot ignore, only then will we see real action taken. And I think that unfortunately it may come to that. NYCHA tenant association presidents or resident council presidents are going to have to really start to organize across borough and really start to understand the collective power that they have as NYCHA tenants. And that's something that I would definitely love to be a part of, and helping them organize to understand the power of their collective voice. But even if you do the RADs and the infills and the air rights, it's still not going to solve the problem. We need Albany and we need Washington to understand that public housing tenants deserve to live with dignity.
Yes. Oh, and you're 100% right. I mean, if NYCHA could organize and the tenants association presidents, they have so much power. Just alone, NYCHA tenants can decide who the next mayor is going to be. Like, it's just, but
It's incredible when you really think about it. 400,000 people in
yes,
just the city of New York alone.
yes, and it sure is. So, and you touched briefly on the RAD program, which is also it's also become quite controversial. Some elected officials and candidates support it, some oppose it, some find a middle ground where they're saying, uh, you know, there needs to be better communication in explaining how this program works. Um, if there was something that you could do to improve the rollout of the RAD program, what would that be?
I think that tenants have to have more of a say in this process.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, tenants are not consulted with; they're not engaged.
Yes.
Um, Tenants are signing leases and not really understanding why they're having to sign new leases. Tenants don't fully understand that what RAD is moving from Section 9 to Section 8. And, although NYCHA still owns the land, the actual building is leased to a private management company for X amount of years,
Mhm.
and you lose tenant protections. That is no longer public housing. I don't care what anybody says to you, but moving from Section 9 public housing to Section 8, which is generally Section 8 is a voucher that you take with you, that you move into a private home or building, and the landlord agrees to accept the voucher in the form of rent payments. We're creating project-based Section 8 and having private management companies take over these buildings in exchange for new kitchen cabinets, in exchange for mm, maybe a bathroom renovation. Um, I'm not sure that's equivalent. I'm not sure that that's equal. And so, the RAD thing is it's controversial, and rightfully so, because tenants are losing their rights, and it is much easier for tenants to be harassed and evicted under a RAD building than it is for them under a building that has not gone through a RAD conversion. And everyone likes to point out to this beautiful poster child of RAD down in Brooklyn, not knowing that if they actually really studied that, tremendous amount of people were evicted from that building after it went through a RAD conversion. That would not have been as easy to do where it remained public housing, and the actual government looked at public housing as the potential that it has. I mean, that is the only real uh, affordable housing for low income people, is public housing, right?
Yeah.
That's the only, for the deeply affordable housing that exists in New York City, is public housing. And under RAD, some folks do see their rent increase, right, up to a maximum of 30%, But there are folks in public housing who were not paying 30% of their income on their rent, who perhaps were paying less than that. And they also need to understand that it will go up to 30% under RAD. So I just don't know that it's an even exchange. Um, do I think that it's a desperate measure? Are you going to find tenants that are happy with RAD conversions? Yeah, you probably will find tenants that like the way that their buildings are being upgraded, but they have to fully understand what it is that they're losing in exchange for that.
No, that's true. And I was going to continue on to our next topic, which was small business. But just speaking about vouchers, before I forget, um, the City FIPS voucher. This, I know you probably saw recent coverage. There was a New York Times article. For our viewers, the City FIPS voucher is a voucher that's given to families and individuals in homeless shelters. There's a certain amount for each type of apartment that you can get. And the big problem with the City FEPS voucher is that the amount is nowhere near a realistic price for an apartment. So, for example, what they're going to give you for a one-bedroom apartment, it wouldn't even pay for a one-bedroom apartment anywhere in the Bronx. And then in addition to that, for our viewers, a lot of realtors and management companies refuse to accept that voucher.
Which is
So
illegal, by the way.
yes, which is illegal. So the families are unable to move out of the shelter system, and they don't have access to the Section 8 voucher, which gives you more money. So my question to you, as councilwoman, how would you help these families, and how would you reform the city FEP system? Because right now, families are stuck in shelters because of that. And how would you hold those landlords, those realtors, those management companies accountable for refusing to accept individuals and families who do have the voucher?
So first of all, anyone who is experiencing source of income discrimination should reach out to the New York City Commission on Human Rights. It is a violation of your human rights to be discriminated against because you have a housing voucher. That's first and foremost. Um, Understandably, however, the city FEPS vouchers, the value of them do need to be increased, right? We need to be realistic. If we want to help people find housing, then we have to, those vouchers should be fair market rate. And there is legislation, once again, in the council, Intro 146, if I'm not mistaken, that would raise the value of the vouchers. And we also need to increase the amount of vouchers, right? We have in New York City a right to shelter. What we don't have is a right to housing. And these vouchers can be a real transformational, proven way of providing permanent housing for people. And so we really have to look to them as a solution to addressing the chronic homelessness that we have in this city. And so as it relates to homelessness, there's so much we can do there as well. Building more supportive housing with mission-driven nonprofits, building social housing. The state has not fulfilled its promise to build 20,000 units of social housing. The city council can do more to provide funding to build more social housing. We absolutely have to look at transforming vacant commercial spaces and turning those into, single room occupancies, distressed hotels, vacant office spaces can be converted. There's so much that we can do there, but we have to look at this from the lens of, do we really think that housing is a human right? And unless and until we start to look at it that way, we're always going to have this band-aid solution to homelessness, which is just putting people in temporary housing, in shelters, and that does nothing to solve homelessness.
Yeah, no, it definitely, that amount for that voucher definitely needs to be increased. So continuing on, I want to talk about small business and economic development here in the Bronx, in your district and throughout the Bronx. With the COVID-19 pandemic, Bronx businesses have taken quite a hit. Small businesses in the Bronx and throughout the city have taken an enormous hit. Many small businesses have already closed. But the most shocking thing to me was a New York Times article that spoke about, that covered the fact that only 2% of Bronx businesses received access to PPP funding,
Mhm.
received any type of stimulus funding from the city or from the federal government. And we're talking 2% of Bronx businesses, 2%. And the biggest complaint that many business owners had was that there was no support for them. Uh, the bureaucratic red tape was just too much, and there was, no one, small business services, Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation, everybody was missing in action, and no one could assist them in completing and submitting these applications for funding. And in your district, I mean, you have Fordham Road corridor, you have White Plains Road corridor. You see all of these small businesses, and you see the people who work in the small businesses. These are people from our communities. It's the small businesses that drive the economy, and it's the small businesses that drive the local economy and employ our neighbors, and they're shutting down. So my question to you is, as city council member, how are you know how are you going to support and help these small businesses recover? How are you going to hold the Small Business Services Administration accountable, and also our local economic development organizations accountable for what's happened, just so we can make sure that this does not happen again?
I mean, look, you hit the nail on the head. It was the bureaucratic red tape that was the biggest issue for Bronx small businesses, from being able to receive these PPP loans. The federal government has made pass, these types of programs, these loan programs, but it is up to us as a local government to make sure that they're administered. It is up to our local small business agency to make sure that we're providing the tools and the resources and the proper outreach and education, that we have these, small business liaisons and ambassadors that are going out there and really helping people understand how to apply for these things, right? The Bronx is home to a lot of immigrant-owned businesses,
Yes.
people who perhaps don't understand. There are language barriers. We need to do all that we can to say, look, this program's available. If you need help with applying for it, we're here for you. These are the resources. Reach out. And I don't think that we did a good enough job of doing that, right? All of these bids, I mean, the bids were probably the only ones that were trying to help a little bit with having people understand how to apply for these things, um, because their bottom line depends on it. But we have to do, 50% of our people are employed by small businesses. These are our community members are working in these small businesses. And here we have, Arthur Avenue, the restaurant industry has been just destroyed by COVID-19 and banning indoor dining. And not only that, but what we were hearing from small businesses were the limitations in what they could spend for those that were able to get the PPP loans. There were limits on what they were able to spend it on, right? Only a quarter of it was to be spent on rent, which for many folks, commercial rent is high in New York City. A quarter of a loan sometimes isn't going to be enough. And so there are some great ideas being thrown out around there. I've heard mayoral candidates talk about subsidizing up to 50% of the incomes of employees and small businesses. I would absolutely be open to that idea. I think providing tax subsidies, property tax subsidies to small business owners in exchange for long-term lease agreements for commercial tenants is a win-win situation, and something that we should absolutely be exploring. But we have to make sure that we are also providing grants that don't have to be paid back. to small businesses. We have to make sure that small businesses fully understand what's available to them. And so the Small Business Administration and the chair of the Committee on Small Businesses have to work together and make sure that we create some sort of ambassador program or liaison program where we're literally putting people out in the streets that go into these small businesses and tell them what's available. Candidates shouldn't be the ones that are going around, sharing flyers about what's available. Like, there should be city agencies and city workers that are dedicated to doing this work. And we absolutely have to do everything we can to support the small businesses, because one of the only ways that we're going to get out of this pandemic is by growing out of it, is by putting people back to work so we can get our tax base back. And that's why the overarching theme and the core of my campaign is jobs and justice, putting people back to work. This is a district that has pockets of it have 25% unemployment rates. We're talking about East Tremont, where I am, and West Farms, where people are out of work and have been pushed further into poverty. We have to create innovative solutions, right? One of the things that I'm pushing for is a public option for employment, which literally means anyone who is out of work, unemployed, and cannot find a job in the private sector should be able to come to the city government, and we should be able to provide them a pathway into a city service job that comes with all of the benefits of organized labor, that comes with retirement benefits, healthcare benefits. There's so much work that needs to be done in public work jobs, public infrastructure, clerical work, cleaning up parks, cleaning up our streets. We can create a public option for employment program for targeted vulnerable populations, for people who are homeless, formerly incarcerated, LGBTQ, seniors, people with disabilities. We have to create these opportunities for people. And we have to sit down with labor and really look at what they do very well, which is apprenticeships, right? Apprenticeships, fellowships, internships. Work-based learning is crucial for young people in the Bronx to be able to learn a skill that they can take with them wherever they go and have family sustaining, community supporting wages. And of course, another thing that I'm really, really focused on are the young people. The young people in this district have had their futures literally swiped from under their feet. And we need a universal year-round youth employment program similar to the summer youth employment program, but something that is not just for the summer, but is year round, right? These young kids have nothing to do. They're isolated. They've lost family members. They're restless, and they need opportunities to be kept busy and to succeed. And we're really failing them right now.
A year-round youth employment program. That's the first I've heard of doing something like that. And that is precisely what is needed. That is what is needed. So, okay, well, now you've given me a question to ask all future candidates. as well as my public advocate and controller interviews, because this is the first time like anyone has said that. But you're right, especially with everything going on with COVID. Many people have lost parents, other family members. In giving our youth an opportunity to work on weekends or after school, I mean, that is sorely needed, and that also really can help bring back our small community economies.
There was a very, very troubling report that came out from the Disconnected Youth Task Force recently that says that 25% of young people in the Bronx are out of work and out of school. It keeps me up at night, and we really have to do something for the future, the next generation of Bronxites.
That is
deeply troubling.
Yeah, very troubling, very disheartening. I can imagine how these young people feel. But yeah, no.
And what happens when you have no economic opportunity? What happens when you have no workforce opportunity? Where do you turn to? What do you end up doing? How close to criminality do you put yourself? So these are things that we are really should really be thinking about. And as I always say, the overwhelming majority of crime that exists is poverty related crime, is people who are out of work and who are desperate and who are literally pushed to do things that they otherwise would not have done if we really invested in them in the right way.
No, that is true. That is certainly true. Which brings me into our next topic. Perfect segue into our next topic, which is public safety and the NYPD, police, community relations, and social justice, and in a sense, economic justice, because it affects everything else, like how you just described. So my question to you is this. Um, we've seen an increase in crime in the Bronx, not just petty crime, but serious crime. Then we have this surge in gun violence. Uh, we have young people dying on the basketball court. We have a 4-year-old child walking on Grand Concourse with her father, and the father getting shot in the head. In Brooklyn, we have a 1-year-old getting shot in the stomach at the park. The stories keep on coming, keep on coming, keep on coming. And for me, as a mother raising a 12-year-old Black young man, uh, I am more concerned about my child being shot by someone that looks like him, okay, than by something happening with my son and the police. Because that is the reality on the ground for us Black and brown mothers. We look at the surge in gun violence. We look at the rampant crime that's happening. And we are doing everything we can to make sure that our sons and daughters stay on the right path. So, keeping all of that in mind and weighing, yes, do we have bad apples in the NYPD? Yes, hell yes, we do. So my question to you is, you know, as a community leader, as a community activist, and as councilwoman, what would you do? What steps would you take to improve police community relations? Um, what steps would you take to ensure that our youth are not afraid of the police, that the police officers also know our youth, so that we can prevent these things from happening? Like, how would you address these issues and improve um, the community's relationship with the NYPD and vice versa?
It's a big controversial topic, and just on a larger scale, I am someone who believes that we do have to spend more money investing in low-income communities of color. I am someone that believes that we absolutely have to pull funds from wherever we have to pull them,
Mm-hmm.
including perhaps the NYPD, in order to invest in universal after-school programming, a universal year-round youth employment program, more arts, more extracurricular. Um, funding playgrounds, funding opportunities to keep young people busy, to provide a good quality of life for them. I think that's part of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Um, I think we have to see more young people of color on our community precinct councils to gain real sort of
Yes.
relationships with their local officers. Um, the police are not the enemy, right? I'm not a abolitionist, right? I mean, I'm progressive, but I'm not that progressive. Um, there's a role for them, right? In keeping in keeping folks safe, but I think we look to police to do too much things that they're just not trained to be doing, right? And so I'm there are places where we can not have them be involved.
Mhm.
But overall, I think the best people that we can look to help with ending gun violence are people who are directly impacted, right? Going to those OGs, going to those men and women who have been through this, who have survived this, and having them come and mentor young people and speak about their experiences, right? I mean, those make some of the best violence interrupters out there. And I think that the council needs to fund more of these cure violence groups, more of these groups like Save Our Streets and Bronx Rising Against Gun Violence, and these nonprofits, these organizations that really dedicate their time to trying to end gun violence in our inner city areas. I think that we should have the cure violence folks have these 24-hour shifts, right? Making sure that they're always ready to respond to something. But it comes to investment. We have to invest in people. All studies show, every major study and report out there shows us that if we really intentionally and meaningfully right the wrongs of our history, and invest in our most impoverished, dilapidated, neglected neighborhoods with
Yes.
real opportunities and programs for people to succeed and lift themselves up out of poverty, that they all show and tell us that that will reduce crime. And so we absolutely have to look at it from that standpoint. I think that the Civilian Complaint Review Board should be an independent and elected position. I think that they should be able to initiate investigations, and I think that they should have a real authority to take disciplinary actions against officers who may engage in misconduct or brutality. I think the answer to this is, again, transparency and democratization. And that includes having real intentional outreach to young people of color to sit again on these community precinct councils. I mean, that's how we can create better relationships between the police and our communities. And there are other measures, such as, you know, making sure that police officers live in the communities that they represent or that they patrol, rather. Um, and that's something that we can explore. But really, it comes down to investment. It really all comes down to investing in people, and really raising their morale and raising their sort of their outlook on things, and just creating positive experiences for people to live with dignity. Because what you have is, when you and then the other problem is, we have to move away from the uh, the punity with people who have been justice system involved, right? How do we expect people to get ahead and become return to society in a meaningful way when we're preventing from gaining tuition assistance, when we're preventing them from getting housing vouchers because of their past of being justice system involved? That's part of it too. That's part of the restorative justice as well. So again, going back to how I started, the people who are best fit to sort of prevent these sort of inner neighborhood violence between young people are the people who've been there and who've survived it, and can really talk some sense into young folks who may be turning towards uh, picking up a gun because of whatever reason it may be. And I also have to say, my final point is, if we're going to be serious about getting guns off the street, we gotta offer more than $200, for gun buyback programs. Like, those are meaningful and they do get guns off the streets, but we have to up that a little bit. Maybe there is much more an incentive for someone to return a gun if you're going to give them an adequate amount of money that they can actually use to pay off a bill or put towards their student loan or something like that. But $200, it's not going to get somebody to be like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to go to this gun buyback and give back my gun for $200. We have to offer a little bit more than that.
Oh, that is true. They need to offer quite a bit more than that. But no, you make some really good points, and I think that implemented, it would go a long way. To improving police community relations, and especially a point about the precinct councils. And it's like, we need young people on the precinct councils. We need the police officers to know who the youth are in our community. When I was growing up in Brooklyn, like junior high school, like we knew the beat cops. Like, and today they don't know the young people in the community. And that's something that we really, really need to change, because it would make a very big difference.
Absolutely.
The last topic, and thank you so very much for for sharing your platform and your point of view on these issues. The last topic that I want to touch on is healthcare, and I'll start first with the situation impacting many Bronxites, probably hundreds of thousands of Bronxites, which is the situation between Montefiore and United Healthcare, because apparently it still hasn't been resolved, this contractual dispute. And now many Bronxites who have Montefiore physicians as their PPPs, GYNs, OBs, you name it. Now those doctors that they've been with for many years are now considered out of network. And this is, we are already reeling from everything having to do with this pandemic. And now you have so many Bronxites who, through all of this, if they go to their doctor, parents, if they go to their child's pediatrician that has been there since the child was born, and our senior citizens who are comfortable with their doctors now are all out of network, which means that if they go to them, they're going to be paying out of pocket. And my question to you is, as city councilwoman, what steps would you have taken to try to, bring about a resolution to this contractual dispute that's literally impacting hundreds of thousands of Bronxites here during a pandemic?
Of all times.
Of all times.
I mean, I think it just shows it proves to us that private healthcare really, they're not there to save people's lives. They're really just there for their bottom line. And, the overarching answer to this question is that we have to move towards a universal healthcare system on a national level, and we can certainly start on a statewide level by passing the New York Healthcare Act. Healthcare is a human right, and no one should be prevented from receiving quality healthcare because of the fact that they can't afford it or they don't have the right health insurance plan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we need to keep drilling that over and over again. And I have faith that we're gonna get there. I think that New York will get there before the federal government gets there. I mean, I've seen lots of elected officials calling on United, is it United Healthcare is the name of it, to not leave that network, to rejoin, to make sure that they can, so that Bronxites can remain receiving care. And I'm happy to join that effort as well and call on them to do the same thing, and send letters of support. But we have to move towards universal healthcare, and we have to also expand the New York City Care Program, which, by the way, is provides preventative care and a primary doctor, among other services, to those who don't have health insurance. And it's meaningful and it's great. And it, by the way, is available to anyone regardless of their immigration status. However, you only can get it at a New York City Health and Hospitals location. And there are but so many of those locations. And I think that we have to expand that program to the community health centers that are in a much closer reach to people in their neighborhoods and in their communities. And so that's absolutely something that I'll be pushing for as a council member, to make sure that people have better access to quality healthcare, is expanding the New York City Care Program into local community health centers. There are plenty of districts that don't have a New York City Health and Hospital. But again, Mona, we have to look at healthcare as a human right. Otherwise, we're only going to continue to hear these horror stories about how people have lost their primary care doctor, or can't get their medication that they need to survive. We're always going to hear that unless and until we push back and we look at patients over profits, and we look at healthcare as a human right.
One last question for you on healthcare and this COVID-19 pandemic. What is your opinion on the city's vaccine rollout so far?
I think that it is obviously not going well. The fact that the communities that were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 are the ones that are disproportionately not receiving the vaccines is an embarrassment of our rollout of the vaccination program. The fact that there are vaccination sites where there are not dual multi-language folks there, where there are folks who are not bilingual, is an embarrassment. I think that I'm very pleased that we are now starting to put fire under the butts of our health department and New York City Health and Hospitals, and the contact tracing, and all of those public health officials who are in charge of this vaccination process. I'm pleased that we are now offering vaccines rather at Yankee Stadium. We're seeing that trend continue to Citi Field, and there's talks of doing it in Barclays Center. But the vaccines have to meet people where they are.
Yes.
The vaccines have to be offered in more sites. We have to be in public housing. We have to be in schools. We have to be in faith-based institutions, right? We have to utilize all the space that we can. And we have to make sure that folks don't have to travel far to get a vaccine. We have to make sure that we're cutting that red tape as to who can get a vaccine. Everyone who wants a vaccine should be able to go and get the vaccine at this point, because the more people that are vaccinated, the more we can control the virus.
Indeed. So, Ms. Crespo, thank you so very much. This interview I've really enjoyed it. It's you've given me some ideas for, as I said, future questions. I give you credit for those questions ahead. I'm going to be using them, but it was indeed a pleasure. Thank you so very much for joining us today, for engaging our community as well, and for letting us know what what District 15, how District 15 will function under a Councilwoman Elisa Crespo. And for our viewers, at the end of this video, we will have a slide with Ms. Crespo's website and her social media handles as well. Ms. Crespo, if you could please give us your closing remarks with your March 23rd election coming up in a few weeks.
Thank you, Mona. I appreciate you for having me. This has been a real pleasure. This was a great conversation. Look, I'm running for office because I'm fighting for working people. This is not about the next step in my political career. It's not about building power. This is about making a city that works for all of us. And we know that the city will not change unless we have the courage to get involved and change it ourselves. I'm here to put people back to work. I'm here to create opportunities for young people to succeed, to be prepared for a 21st century job market. I'm here to make sure that our streets are clean and safe. And I'm here to center the voices of our most vulnerable and marginalized who feel voiceless. My number one mission and goal is to improve the quality of life of people in District 15 and in the Bronx and New York City as a whole. And I'm a fighter. I've had to fight all my life to achieve and accomplish everything that I have. I can get things done. I know how to cultivate strong relationships with people. And it would be my honor to represent the 15th Council District. So please go to elisacrespo.com and read more about me and my policies, and sign up to take action and volunteer, because no campaign is successful without an army of volunteers hitting the streets and getting the message out. So thank you so much, Mona. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. And we'll be watching the campaign for the next few weeks. And folks, please get out and vote. There is no excuse not to vote. Absentee ballot, early voting, and on election day, get out and vote. March 23rd is the District 15 special election. So Ms. Crespo, thank you again so much for joining us today at Little Africa Bronx News.
Thank you. Be safe.
Thank you.